This is being recorded. Thank you, Susan. All right, so this is our 2024 update training, a little bit of a tutorial on goCrop. Three main objectives for us today. I want to go over how to update a plan, how to generate reports, and then also introduce the mobile app. Some folks might already be familiar with the mobile app, but I think it would be really great to let our farmers know that it exists and that it is a tool specifically designed to help them look at their plan and also enter records in the field. So with that, I am going to go to goCrop. Here we go. Okay. So can folks see my sign in right now? Amber Niner Head, hopefully I'm in the right place.
Yes.
So just like when creating a plan, you update a plan, anything you go do in goCrop, you have to log into your account. So click login. And with this farm. Just to double check folks and see that I'm on the dashboard, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So today I'm going to start with much like when we create a plan, sometimes it's really nice to start by just looking at the narrative and making sure that that is up to date with what the farmer plans to do. And that's also a really great way to reintroduce or reorient yourself to what's going on with the farm and kind of have some of that discussion. So just a quick refresher, to do that, we go to reporting tools, you choose the crop year that you want to talk about. In this case, 2024 plan. And then we, from here, go to our plan details, and we can see the information that we've entered before. Actually, and I just realized that because we're in 2024 already, I already started this plan, but for you, let's say that you were in 2023 and you wanted to start a new 2024 plan, you go click New Vermont Nutrient Management Plan, put in your crop year, keep the plan date, and then on the last year. Because what that does is it copies over all the narrative information. I think it's really important to stay here that in the plan detail section in the narrative, that's a little bit separate from all the information you enter in your fields. So if you copy your Vermont Nutrient Management Plan, you're not necessarily copying all your fields over. That's kind of a running task that goCrop does in the back. So we put 2025 here or 2024, save your Vermont Nutrient Management Plan, and then you would have your plan started. I already had mine started, so kind of skipping ahead there. But we'll go look at the narrative. Some things are going to be pretty static. You won't need to look at too much. Again, you go to the plan details. This basic information stays rather stagnant. It'll update with your crop year you're in, your farm name will transfer over. You can update the years of farming every year. And again, that years of farming can be accumulative. It could be out that farm, really whatever makes sense for the farmer in that moment. The plan date will be whatever today's date is that you started it. Planner information will largely stay stagnant. And these are the pieces in the plan narrative that make sense to have a conversation with your producer about. Has the land base changed? Has the management changed? Either with crops or animals? Have they added any land? Have they sold any land? Are they leasing any land? Have they gotten any other types of support that would otherwise change how they manage their farm operation? And again, with that in mind, you would update the typical rotation. Again, the yield determination method will pretty much stay stagnant. And to change anything in the plan details section, you'll click any of these orange buttons with the pencil on it. And it's pretty easy to type in and change any of the text that you'd like. And one of the nice things too is you can always make these boxes a little larger by dragging down on this little hash mark in the right-hand corner. For this plan, I'm not planning on making any changes, but you very easily could. Typically, the manure and the tillage don't change all that often, but you might be working with a producer who has recently transitioned to no-till or organic farming, or has incorporated animals, or has sold their animals, or maybe importing or exporting manure. And you would make any of those updates in these sections. The watershed section stays pretty stagnant, the same. And then again, with their land base, in addition to maybe putting that in the narrative above, writing the text for that, you would adjust the land base for any fields that they have added or sold or leased or rented in this section as well. And the same with their livestock inventory. They've added any to their herd. If they've decreased any of their animal numbers, you would make that change here. And you could do that by either, a moment, you can delete your animal groups by pressing the X button here. You can also edit them by pressing the edit button for that particular group. And again, these are some of the same questions you probably are familiar with creating a plan, so not much would change there. And then you can also add animal groups again with the plus button right here. Okay. So once you've created your plan, you are now ready to update your plan. And you're hopefully at this point have had some conversations with your producer about what their intentions are going into the new season. So the first place I'd like to start with that is by actually going back to the dashboard and import some records. So before I can import a record, I need to, well, I should back up and say there are two ways to enter soil test information. One is you can go field by field rather manually and go to your info section here, go to your soil tests, and you can add one manually here, input all the information that you will have received from the lab, your organic matter, your pH, CEC, phosphorus, potassium, and aluminum, and then save your soil test. Again, goCrop defaults to what is necessary to meet the state standards for a nutrient management plan. If you would like to track any other nutrients, or the producer would like to track any other nutrients, you have those rows here. Generally, I kind of advise against that because that can really make things a little bit more, it adds more detail going forward when I think creating a nutrient management plan already has a lot of detail to begin with. So we'll go to your farm I want to show you how to import a soil test. And the very first place that we need to start with is actually looking at the CSV or the Excel workbook that that you may have received in your email. So here you can see I've got my Excel worksheet that's come in my email from the UVM AETL, the Agriculture and Environmental Testing Lab. And goCrop can't really take an Excel workbook, but it can take a CSV. So I want to show you how to save this as a CSV. So first we got to open it up. And we'll just take a quick look at our fields here. You guys can't see this spreadsheet, is my guess. Can you? Yeah, we can. Okay, great. I wasn't sure if I had my share screen or just my share window. So thank you for the head nod, Amber. Appreciate it. So you can see here that I've got, my 3 fields here, 12-1, Small River, and River Field 1. Now, back in my account, when we look at our fields, you can see I've got field behind the barn, which is my 12-1, field by river, and my small field. And my field by the river is 30 acres. And so when soil samples were taken, we took 2, divided it in half, whatever way made the most sense, because that's what's required of us for our nutrient management plans. But what makes most sense if you see these, you're like, oh, I'm looking at, my field 1, field 2, this is really the same field. And all of my nutrients, my pH, my organic matter, they're all really similar. And so at the end of the day, what I'm really going to do is use an average because it doesn't make sense for me to manage these halves of the field differently. I'm not going to anyway. So what I would do in that case is I would create a river field average so that I can import this as well. I'm going to copy my order number, my date, my lab ID. I'm going to say, I'm going to have an average of these two. And I'm going to run that through the length of my my soil test results there. So now that I've done that, I'm going to save this. Do a regular save for a moment. Now I'm going to come back here and take I'm going to save a copy of it. And when I do this, I'm going to make sure that I know which file I'm saving it to so I can find it in the import. And I'm going to come down here where it says Excel workbook, and I'm going to change this to a CSV. And there's a couple of CSVs you'll see here for Macintosh, MS-DOS, but you just want a typical one, the CSV, comma delimited. We don't really want this UTF-8 one. We want just the plain CSV file right here. We'll see that. We're going to click save, and then we'll say, are you sure? If I close it down, so I'm just going to close this. Now I've saved it as a CSV. And it looks like that's saved rather well. We have two files here, one of our worksheet and one of our CSV. So now we're going to come back to goCrop. We're at our dashboard. And I'm going to come back to our dashboard here, and I'm going to come down to import data. I'm going to choose new import. Since our field or soil sample results are from VBM Soil Lab, we'll choose that our template is from the Soil Lab here. If you've got it from Dairy One or a different soil lab, that's fine as long as they use modified Morgan's as a phosphorus extractant or just as their soil extractant. It's really important because of how it does extract phosphorus and the machine reads it. So if you did receive it from another lab, you can either download a template, choose other from there. And if you have more questions about this, happy to be through how to do that. But for now, let's just go with the UVM AETL Soil Lab template. We'll go to choose our file. And it's picked up my pathway already. And remember, we had two files, but that were fantastic farm soil samples. But because goCrop only recognizes CSV, that's the only thing that shows up. So I'm going to click yes and click open. This is just some information about letting us know how we can walk through using the import. And notice I have 3 fields, but 5 soil tests. We'll go to the next step. So now here we are in the configure section. We have a little walkthrough up here for importing our farm data. And on the left are the names that were given for the soil samples on the soil sample submission form. And on the right are all the field names in goCrop. So goCrop tries to match them as well as it can. So for example, 12-1 is field behind barn, and goCrop said, okay, I don't see field behind barn, but I see 12-1, and that tracks with the FSA tracking field number. So it'll look at both the field name and the tracking field number to try to connect them. You can see it's done a great job with small field as well. And then it gets a little tripped up because of river field 1, 2, and 3. And that's because there was a little bit of a small labeling error or I should say error, but mismatch, right? River field by river, river's not spelled correctly. There's an I missing. And so we can use the drop down to connect it. And so because I want goCrop to keep track of river field 1, river field 2, and also the average, I will choose all 3 of them. And now it's at this point when I am importing my soil test results that I remember that goCrop is going to use the most recent soil test first. to use to make recommendations. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say, well, I remembered I made an average, but I didn't change the date. No worries. We're going to go, we're going to close out of this. We're going to go back to our CSV. We're going to open that up. And we're going to change the date here to just 1 day later for the sample date. We'll save this, we'll close it out, come back to goCrop, and we'll start it all over again. Oops. And I see that I changed this, but we're just gonna go with it here. It's for some reason it's picking up the date that I put in and not the field name, but no matter, we know what that is. So we're gonna put it by field by river. And we're also gonna do the same for these. And we're gonna come back here. So you'll see this sometimes too, where maybe you'll have a field soil sample, but not a field in goCrop for it. And if you don't want that to be in your NMP for whatever reason, maybe you took the soil sample and then realized that you were actually leasing that out or selling it or not applying nutrients, or you can't figure out which field it actually goes to. So in order for goCrop to skip it, you can just say, I'm going to choose a corresponding value, which is really saying I'm going to leave it blank. We see it, we have my small field connected, my river field 2, my river field average. So now that I'm like talking through this, you can see that going through a couple of different iterations here. And part of this is because I want to walk you through how I would first see it and how you might first see it, and then say, okay, wait a minute, what else is actually happening? So now that I realize this, remember I said, oh, I want this, I changed this date. In the process of that, of coming and going into my CSV and opening it up and saving it again, for whatever reason, it took my 12-1 field name and converted that to a date. And that's why it says 1st of December. So it's really, sometimes you got to know a little bit behind what's going behind the scenes and how the machinery might work, and also what you know to be there. So although this says 1st of December, what this is really trying to do is connect it with this track field number 12-1. So just there as well. Once you have all your fields matched up, you'll see this screen and it will say, okay, remember how we had all those different columns for each one of our soil tests that were in rows? And what this is looking at is saying, well, there's a bunch of numbers here I don't need, right? Like I don't need the order number, so we're going to skip that. But I do need a bunch of this other information, like the date, the pH, the organic matter, potassium, and then we have a bunch of our micronutrients, and it's goCrop is saying we don't need this right now, so skip it. So again, this is a point where I would recommend just using the nutrients that goCrop is asking you to use, because again, that's what is required for to meet the state requirements for nutrient management planning. But again, if you're working with a producer who really wants to track boron, for example, in their soil, then this would be a great time to say, well, instead of skip this column, I want to keep this column. And say, the results here. But for now, we're just going to say skip the column. And then we'll go down here. You can see the rest of the aluminum right there. And some other types of information we need from the soil test. We'll preview with these settings. And basically this is saying, hey, here are the fields, right? Here are the test dates. Here's where we connected them to. We've got 3 results, 3 nutrients. Our results being the pH, organic matter, CEC, and our nutrients being phosphorus, potassium, and aluminum. This all looks good. If you're skipping a field, it will kind of flag that, or skipping a soil test result, it'll kind of flag that, and you can say skip. For now, this looks good, so I'm going to click import. And this will take a little bit of a moment. You see the gears are churning and doing their thing. Gonna wait a minute. It says, okay, we got all that stuff in there. That looks good. So we'll close that. And just to double check that our soil test did import, we'll come to fields. And the one I'm really curious about, of course, is the field by river. And I have my two that I just imported today. And my, it does not. See, we've got the two that we imported today and one left over from last time as well. Go field behind barn. And again, we've got our one imported from today as well. I do notice, and this is why I paused for a moment, that for whatever reason, my average doesn't seem to have come through. And I know that because the dates didn't transfer over. And if this is the case, then we could add that manually through this plus button here, opening up our CSV and just transferring them in. In the event that you do come up against a bug like this, feel free to email me. Some of that information that's really helpful to know is what you were doing, what field you were on, and what account you're in. Sometimes even copying the URL is really helpful too. So once you've imported your soil tests, one of the other really important things to do is also make sure that you have an up-to-date manure sample also entered in. To do that, you go to your dashboard, nutrient sources. In this example, we have a small pit and a stack. For each one of these, it's required that there's a manure test every single year. So this one was taken in August of 2023, so we wouldn't really need another one until, October 2023. So we wouldn't really need another one until October 2024. But to add one, you don't go in and edit it and change what's there. You add a new manure sample result, much like you would a new soil sample result with the plus button here. You enter your information as necessary. And we've gone over some of this before, so I'm not going to go fill all of this in. I think hopefully folks understand. And if you don't, feel free to reach out to me. And you want to make sure you do that for all manure sources that the producer will be applying, whether that's generated on farm and also if it's generating or if they're importing it as well. This estimated annual total, this is reflective of what they have on their farm. So occasionally you might be working with someone and let's say they say, well, I have, 5 million gallons, but I export 2 million of it. I would make a note of that here and I would change, they said they were exporting 2 million, estimated annual total to 3 million here, because that's going to impact the report for the manure drawdown. So I make that note here as a reminder to, the producer or whomever's going to help them update it later, that that's the math behind it. And then I would also go ahead and make sure to make a similar note in the nutrient management plan narrative as well. Pretty much the same thing. I don't think it hurts to have it in two places in the plan details where you go here and say, in the narrative, we generate 5 million, we export 2 million. So our drawdown is based on 3 million. So that gets us to part of like 2 of the 3 major pieces of information that need to be, or records that need to be entered into goCrop. But before we get to the 3rd leg of that, I think one of the other important things is to look at the field by field information. So if we look at the field behind barn, for example, again, we have those 5 tabs on the right, and the ones that I want to concentrate right now on are the first 3. So we're in our 2024 plan. We're just going to take a quick look at each one of these to make sure it all makes sense. So in general, this top part's not going to change much. We've already input our soil tests, and then our nutrient management plan details also wouldn't change that much, except if you or the producer is rotating the field from a sod crop to an annual production without cover crops. If that's the case, then you might need to change how living vegetation in April. That's the major thing that you may have to change, especially in the case that there's a rotation, either going from sod to corn or from corn to sod or some other annual production. If they have a plan on planting a cover crop that will live and persist through the winter, and that cover crop will probably be decent, like they planted winter rye in the middle of September, chances are that it'll catch and germinate and look real well going into the winter and will come back after the winter. And so that would be living vegetation in April. If they planted a mix of clover, radish, and annual ryegrass in the middle of October, there's a real low probability that that would have a real substantial stand to actually quantify as living vegetation, mainly because a bunch of that is annual, and the clover probably wouldn't last that long or cover that much. So after you look at your field information, you'll take a look at the rotation, and just make sure that this still coincides with what the farmer plans to do. So we can see that in 22, 23, we were in our grass crops, and we're still thinking about in 2024 staying in hay. It's not uncommon to work with a producer who might have 5 years ago said, oh yeah, this is permanent hay or permanent pasture, and things change, and now they want to rotate it to 1 year of wheat or 1 year of corn. Generally, that's okay, and that's a time where, you know, you open up a discussion with the producer and say, okay, well, let's talk about the management of that. And that would probably also involve then rerunning a Russell with that rotation if there's not already a rotation like that on a field with a similar soil type and basically the same field practices. So in the event where, for example, I was working with a producer and he said, oh, I want to change this grass field into, you know, 1 year of corn silage followed by 5 years of grass. And we didn't have that rotation in there, but there was a field right nearby, same soil type with the same exact management he's planning on using. I then just said, okay, well, that Russell 2 information is going to be the same, and was able to plug that in. I got lucky that time, and more often than not, I reach out to one of our wonderful collaborators and to ask them to run a Russell and the information that's necessary for that. So once we say, okay, this is all good, then we go to our crops. And this is a situation where, since we're in a perennial production, the crop doesn't need to be, it'll carry over from year to year. But if you were in an annual production, the goCrop would look a little bit different. It would have a button that say, oh, you have no crops for this year. And it would give you 2 different options. One that would say, I just want to start from scratch and put in a crop, just add a crop, or I want to copy a crop from a past year. And that's those things I think are pretty intuitive to walk through. But the one thing that I do want to talk about here in Field Behind Barn, and this is something to be on the lookout for older plans. So I'm not going to edit this necessarily. I'm going to look at it with the blue button here. You can see I've got a bunch of this information. I can edit any of it. Most of it's staying the same, but the thing that I do need to change here is that it says using custom values. And this is because way back when folks were first using goCrop, you had to input all your recommendations, much like you had to input manually all the soil test results. And in order to prompt goCrop to use automatically generated recommendations from any new soil test that comes in, or anytime you change a crop, you need to prompt it to do that. And the way that you do that is by pressing this orange button here. And you're going to actually, right here, we're in the recommendations section. We're actually delete all of these. And just to make sure we captured this, and I made this clear, that using custom recommendations or using custom values mean they were manually entered. And so this phrase will change once we tell it to use automatically generated recommendations, which is based off of the Vermont's nutrient guidebook for field crops. So we'll edit that. We're in the recommendation section, and we're just going to delete all of these rows by pressing the red X square. And now we've got our recommendations. They're blank. We're just going to say update crop. And now when we open this up, our recommendations now say using book values. And it's going to say, okay, well, we know that you're using alfalfa grass mix, 30% legume maintenance, and that's because it's pulling it from the crop. I think that's one thing to also keep in mind is that your rotation that you have here can be different from the crop that you have listed in your crops tab. So you want to make sure that both of those match. The other thing you may or may not need to update, even like particularly in a perennial crop, is that the establishment year is a seeding year. And that means it has different recommendations. So it's really important that if you're going from your first year of establishment to a second year that's maintenance, that in your crop that you do edit that by pressing the orange button and clicking yes or no, depending on what's going on for that particular crop. The other thing I think is important to notice or mention too, is that it's not uncommon, right, to plant a new seeding and have a high percentage of legume. And over the years through competition, that legume percentage can drop. So I think it's also important to discuss with your producer what the legume percentage is out there, you know, your clover, your alfalfa, your vetch, to make sure that your recommendations reflect the amount of nitrogen fixation that might be coming through that legume, or the amount that your crops don't need because there's a legume present. If you put a lot of nitrogen down on a field with a lot of legume, you tend to favor the grasses, and you might not necessarily want to do that for your feed quality. So this is another point of a topic to bring up with the producer and have them check. Depending on their familiarity with goCrop, this is something that you can give them as homework. Just like, look at your rotations and crops and make sure that these key pieces all make the most sense. Okay, so we've gotten through those pieces. And then another really big part of planning for 2024 or your new plan is to actually go back and make sure you have the records entered from the previous year, because that will impact what you're actually going to plan in 2024. So there's like two ways to do that. I'm going to show you the field by field method, and then I'm also going to show you the method where you can just keep on adding. So for example, we can go to field behind barn. We're going to go to field records. And then I think it's really important that when you're entering a record, be really cognizant, really aware of what year you're in. So when I'm entering records, I automatically just go to the year that I'm entering the records for, so that my date picker, my calendar that comes up is at least in the right year. 2023. And for our field behind barn, we're going to start with the harvest record. And then we're going to fill out some of the pieces from our drop down, and then our record date. We're just going to say, for right now, we took one at the end of May, and I want to record it as loads. You can do total loads, bales, or bushels, and whatever you will dictate what this drop down is. So we'll say 50 tons. That's what I got off the entire field, and I'll save this harvest. So my harvest record should show down here in my activity with my field records. To make sure I did that correctly. Did I go the, it's because I went backwards. That's exactly what happened. It started me in one place and I went to another. So, because I messed up on the date, very important. And just to show what happened, right? I was like, I just put that in, it's not showing up below. And then immediately I'm like, why isn't goCrop working correctly? Well, and then I went to 2024 and I was like, well, I didn't mess up that way. If I go back to 2022, there's my harvest record. And so what I'm going to do to fix this, instead of creating a new record, is I'm going to click on the edit button and I'm just going to change this to 2023. I'll update my harvest record. And I'll move it from 2022 to 2023. And we can take a look at what that looks like. And so it does some math for you. It says, okay, you said you took 50 tons off, and that's 4.1 tons per acre. The other thing goCrop doesn't tell you, which is really important, is that this is reported in dry matter tons. So in actuality, right, when you're harvesting, your wagon load is going to be quite a bit heavier because it will be wet, but we want to take it in dry matter yield, because that's how recommendations are based, or they're based off of that. That was one way, and you can do the same thing for manure. There's a bunch of other different records. The other one that you might use the most is fertilizer, but you can also put in forage test, pest control, scouting and seeding, tillage, tissue analysis. Oh, and the weather is really important for every manure application that you put down. I'll show you what that looks like in a different form. So these are all your options, but again, the top three that you'll use the most are your fertilizer, your harvest, and your manure. I would also say when you're working with a producer and they're like, this is just too much to put into goCrop, I think the biggest pieces to enter into goCrop would be your fertilizer and your manure. But that'll be really helpful to have into goCrop, especially your manure, because that has some amount of nitrogen residual that'll carry over from year to year. But harvest records, you can keep them. It's great to have them in goCrop if you want to store all your data there, but they don't need to be stored in goCrop, but the producer does need to have a record of them, but they can be on paper or in an Excel spreadsheet, wherever data management system they have that works best for them. And this is something that you can really reflect on when we're thinking about, well, when we're looking at what is the potential or the anticipated yield for a year that we would put in the crops. We can always look at our harvest records and make adjustments based off of that. And again, this is on dry matter yield. And I think the other thing I'll say on this too is that, again, it's not uncommon in a new seeding for grass for it to perform lower in the first year than in subsequent years. So that would be another change that you would make in an updated plan. So the other way to make records is through the add record button. And what's really nice about this is that you can kind of in quick succession add the same type of record to multiple fields. So for example, do a manure application, and let's say I spread manure on all my fields on the same day in the same method. Let's say field behind barn, my record date. Again, I'm going to make sure I'm actually putting this in the right year. We're going to say we got a pretty early application on April 19th. And we took it off from the small pit, and I'm going to record it as a rate, and we'll say we did 5,000 gallons per acre, and we injected it. If you choose inject, it automatically chooses time to incorporation as 0. If you choose any of the other options, it'll give you a way to put in the days to incorporation, and then we'll choose the soil which has to dry. Maybe for us it was slightly moist. So I've done this for field behind barn. I'm in manure application. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to save and add another. And then it keeps a lot of the same information. So I'm going to choose my next field. It keeps the record date. It keeps the small pit. So okay, we know you want to record this as rate. And then we can choose the gallons per acre or that we put on that field as well. And then it says, well, you also said you were using the same equipment and the soil moisture was this on that date. So it just transfers that over. And you always have the option to change it. So this is a nice way to get that done pretty quickly. Manure application, we'll put on one more. Say 5,000 here. And all this is the same. The last record I want to show you how to enter using this form, and you can also access the same form in your field by field record planning, is the weather record. And the weather record is just a little bit different in that you can apply it to the same field. Assume, and you don't have to, for example, but it'll ask you for the required information. Such as the temperature, cloud cover from a drop down, precipitation again from a drop down. And then maybe you went to a bunch of fields that day, you can say I'm going to select them all, or maybe say, okay, well, I went to all of them except for field by river. It's not uncommon for folks who are using this just to click select all and have it apply it to their entire farm, given that the weather was the same across all those fields. For some producers, their fields might be really far apart, and so they can apply one weather record to one set of fields and another weather record to a different set of fields. So I'm going to save this record. So I'm going to be done for now. And we'll close this out. And just to double check, right, here I've got my, in my 2023 year for my field behind barn, I've got my harvest record, I've got my manure record I just put in, and then I also have my weather record. One thing I will say about the add record button, just in case you get here and you don't press the save record button. What see if you come here and do, let's say we're going to add another manure application to behind the barn, and this time we'll make it for June 8th. A small pit, and we'll say another 5,000. Inject again, save and add another. You can close out of that form. Previously there was a bug where you couldn't close out of the form, and I wanted to show you that that was an issue that you might come up to. And if you do come to an issue where you can't leave a form that you're in easily, it's just best to sign off out of goCrop and then sign back in. All right, so we have gone over a lot of the back end pieces to get to the point of updating your plan nutrient balance. So let's go check out your fields. And again, sticking with field behind the barn. And I'm just going to take a peek at our field records. We're in 2024, so we don't have any activity to show. And we've got our records here. We've got 3 or 2 different manure applications. And just for fun, I'm going to add one more. Because remember in 2024, I don't have anything showing here. So we're going to put another one as a late fall application. And we're doing it with 5,000s. In real life, hopefully, whoever's actually applying this would be looking at their nutrient management plan to see how that coincides with their recommendations, but we're just kind of doing this as a for funsies example. And now we can see, okay, so we're in 2023, we're in our field records tab. We can see in our records, we have 1 harvest, 3 manure applications. And when we see these, we also see that our balance is above the recommendation. Our producer, me in this case, it didn't follow my nutrients, my nutrient management plan, and I've over applied considerably on my nitrogen. And so this might be a problem if this happened in real life. So this might be just a thing to think about that you might see, but you know, what's done is done, and this accurately represents what the farmer did. Then we'll go to 2024. And part of the reason why I wanted to add that 3rd nutrient application in is because it shows up your 2023 fall applications show up in your 2024 year, because those nutrients by and large get carried over to your next crop, in particular the phosphorus. Anything considered a summer or spring application of 2023 in this case, that nitrogen gets passed on to the following year through mineralization rates, but the phosphorus does not. It's assumed to be used during that year because we honestly don't have enough data to say, you know, if you start with 80, like a certain percentage of phosphorus in your manure, that a certain percentage of that goes to your crop. So here's what we've got here. It totals our 2 5,000-gallon applications as 10,000 and gives us a nitrogen credit for that. We're in 2024, and then it also says, hey, you also have this fall application, and all those nutrients are getting punted over to the 2024 plan. So this is where the farmer is going to start with in their records, looking at how their past decisions may influence what they can possibly do in the future. So we're in 2024 field records. Let's look at what our plan looks like. And it's basically saying the same thing, right? Because we haven't changed anything quite yet. So now that we're looking at this, and we can say, okay, well, I can't apply any more nutrients with nitrogen in it because I'm already over my nitrogen recommendation here. The standards are that you can't be over 10% of the nitrogen recommendation. So I could be, my balance could be in the red at 40 or at 4, but this is too much. So this might be a conversation then we're like, okay, well, let's look at the crop. It's hay. And here they say, oh, the legume percentage is 40. And I might say, well, is it really 40? And they might say yes. I'm like, okay, well, then we'll just stick with that. But they might say, well, actually, no, it's 20. It's been a number of years, or the legume didn't catch all that well. Say, okay, well, we'll update that. We'll go to our nutrient planning. And there's a big difference between 20% legume and 35% legume because the cutoff for the nitrogen recommendations is 30%. So now we have a little bit more wiggle room here in more manure applications to apply or fertilizer applications to meet our nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium recommendation. If the producer sees this and say, okay, you know, I've got a little bit more manure to empty in my pit, I'm going to add a planned manure application to kind of help with that and also meet my nutrient needs. Now we're in 2024. I have no plans, and so yet on when to apply in 2024. So I'm going to make my first plan, and maybe the producer says, well, the best time for me to spread on the field is as early as possible. So we're going to go with mid-April in 2024. Still talking about the small pit, and 5,000 gallons seems like a good rate, and we're still going to go with inject. The other thing I would say too, just as you're looking at this information, the amount of nitrogen credits that are given per application not only depend on the time of year, like, you know, summer 2023 can transfer over some nitrogen credits to 2024, but also if you're applying in, like your plan will also take into account the method of application. So injecting, there's a higher percentage of nitrogen that is available to the crop than moldboard, than chiseled, and disc. And then the longer there is between application and applying, the more nitrogen can volatilize or otherwise leach to the soil system rather than being incorporated. And that can also decrease the amount of nitrogen that comes from a single application. So we're going to stick with inject for this and say planned manure application. And now we have our two applications right here. One from the fall and our now spring application. So a couple of things that I would talk about here is that if you have been working with a producer for a number of years, it's not a, what you'll see coming into a 2024 plan is this option to copy past years' plans. And that can be really helpful because you probably already had this conversation with a producer, or somebody did a few years ago, about what makes the most sense for them to apply and when to apply it. And so you can just copy that over. And from there, you can have a conversation about, well, does that still make sense? Does it still apply? And at the end of the day, you'll still have a similar table that looks like this. One thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at your balance of planned nutrients, not your record, there is a difference between a plan and a record. And the real big difference just off the bat is seeing that a record has an actual date with it, and the plan has a range, either early, mid, or late, and then the months. So in this case, maybe the producer says, well, I want to add a little bit more manure to help meet my nitrogen recommendation. You know, you wouldn't go back into the record to increase this 5,000 amount, but you could go and edit the planned application in mid-April 2024 by pressing the orange button here. And we're just going to bump this up to 6 and see what happens here. So now when we look at our balance, all right, I've got a recommendation up at the top, 160 for nitrogen, 64 for phosphorus, 140 for potassium. And I'm really close to my nitrogen amount. You could try to bump it up so it's 4 or 16 pounds greater than your recommendation. if that was something the producer wanted to do. And this is part of the, what I kind of sometimes call the song and dance of nutrient balancing, as, you know, opening this back up, bumping it up a little bit more and seeing what is that number to get you to right to that point of meeting crop recommendations and also staying in compliance with the nutrient management planning standards. So here up at 7,000 in mid-April, I'm just bumping up against that 10% threshold. And I'm really over on phosphorus. And so here's some of the conversation that we look at then when we're talking about phosphorus. And is another point where I often have the 590 standard from NRCS. Sorry, it was really blurry, right next to me. Because in here, there is on page 3, it breaks down the P index into, you know, low, medium, and or low, moderate, high, and very high categories. And each one of those categories kind of has a different threshold of how much phosphorus you can apply. So when you are in the low category, I'm just going to read this right off the 590 standard. Phosphorus applications can be applied at rates to supply phosphorus at greater than crop removal, but not to exceed the nitrogen requirement of the current crop. So we're still within our nitrogen limitations, and it says it can go over crop removal. So I'm going to click this button up here. It says show crop removal, and I'm way over crop removal. You know, my phosphorus recommendation is rather high. It's higher than crop removal to begin with because my soil test P is so low. And the recommendation is really designed to bring the soil is deficient in a nutrient to bring it up to optimal level. So it's saying you can apply more phosphorus to this because we actually want the phosphorus to accumulate there. And over years, it will accumulate, and then your phosphorus recommendation will decrease. But because our P index is so low, we can apply past crop removal rates, and that's okay for now. Our potassium is over our balance, it's over the crop removal rates. And I would say with this that potassium right now is not a nutrient that is regulated. So I typically in this situation would say to my producer, hey, or the producer I'm working with, the potassium is over recommendations, it's over crop removal. If you've got something, a crop in there that will luxury consume potassium, draw more potassium in its plant tissue than is necessary, that may cause an issue with your feed and your quality and could cause some livestock health issues. So just something to be aware of when they're balancing their rations. So just as an example, what I'm going to do now, keeping everything else the same, but changing my phosphorus soil test result, we're going to see a number of things change, the recommendation and also the P index. I'm going to come here, just as an example, we'll edit this, and I'm going to bump this up to say 15, which is, I think, in the higher, very high category. And now when I go to nutrient planning, my phosphorus recommendation is 0. I haven't changed anything else, but my soil test P is still low. My value has gone up. And the reason why my soil test P is, or my P index is low is because of my management. It's all grass, I'm injecting. So the potential for the phosphorus, even though I have a really high rate that I'm applying at, given the amount of soil phosphorus that's already in there, the potential for it to move off my field is really low because of the way I'm applying it. It's all injected, and the management that I have with the grass. So if we change this and say we don't incorporate it, let's see how that changes the P index. So again, since I just changed my management, my recommendation is going to stay the same. My soil test phosphorus hasn't changed the same, still 15 at an interpretation of high. And now my Vermont P index is a 65 instead of a 22. That I'm not injecting, I'm not incorporating it. And now my P index is a medium. So again, just reading from the 590 standard, if it's a medium P index reading, Applications can be applied at rates not to exceed crop removal or the soil test phosphorus recommendation. So now, because of how I'm applying it, I'm over the limit of the recommendation of the crop removal. I always was, but now I'm really over crop removal. And it's a problem because my P index is medium. So I think I wanted to use this as a way to illustrate that if, depending on how much you apply and when you apply it and the method that you apply it, it can change the phosphorus index. So as you're trying to meet the nutrient needs of one nutrient, nitrogen, or trying to meet with another with phosphorus, you really want to double check in with the P index and making sure that you're not exceeding the balance, or depending on what the P index says, the crop removal, and double checking with these three pieces. So just to make my thing look a little less red, we're going to go back into injects here. And that has then brought me down to low, and so I can be over crop removal on this. This is a lot of back and forth and clicking through the manure, planned manure application and figuring out what tools the producer has available, how much manure they actually need to spread, and then also looking at what nutrients they have on the field and how much of that can be supplied with manure. Let's say that, you know, in a different situation too, let's say there's different applications, not as much manure. You can also add fertilizers, same way that you do with manure, just add a plant fertilizer application, choose your date, the type of corn or type of fertilizer you're going to use, and then your rate and application type. These are kind of when you're going to apply, and then incorporation method of those fertilizers. And if you don't see the fertilizer that you plan on applying in the dropdown, that just means that it needs to be entered into your nutrient sources, which again are found in your farm nutrient sources tab. Okay, so the last thing that I want to touch on here before moving onto the mobile app is just generating reports. And to do that in goCrop, we'll go to reporting tools. And you might want to have on hand for your producer, not only their 2024 plan, but also their 2023 records. And so you'll have to go to two different places to get that. To get their 2023 records, you have to go into their plan. And then there's two different formats you can use for their records. They both have the same information, just a different layout. See if I can generate both of those. So I was running into this problem earlier today when I was seeing what goCrop was like, is that today, for whatever reason, even though all forms are best going through on goCrop using the Google Chrome browser, today, for whatever reason, we're going to go to Firefox to generate our reports because that worked for me today. So I'm going to take a look at our record log here. This way. And again, this is something too, like I see this as a bug. I will contact the developer saying, hey, Chrome will generate my reports, but Firefox will, and have that fixed for next time. But sometimes, depending on what's going on, there might be a workaround in the short term to get to where we want to be. So today, that's Firefox. So our field record log here just shows us for field behind barn. Each page has its own field and just gives us all the records that went on there. So our 3 manure applications, our harvest, and our weather record. The combined record log shows it a little bit differently, a little bit more truncated in terms of you have your fields and columns, and then the type of records you have in the rows. So that snapshot, you can quickly see what went where. And then to get to our plan, we'll go to our reporting tools here. 2024 is the plan we want. From here to our blue dots. That'll take us here. We'll go to our combined report. There are a few things I want to point out here as we're looking through this. And it'll take a second. I think that's another thing to keep in mind, is that goCrop will continually count down 5 seconds until it's ready to generate. You can see that if it stops at 0 and doesn't keep refreshing, that just means the report won't generate. So here's what a report looks like. I think most folks will be familiar with this, but I think it's worth taking a look at when you're updating. Generally, I scan this one more time just to make sure it all makes sense. Probably hadn't changed too much. And then the big thing I look at, right, each year in our updated nutrient management plan is the manure drawdown. And what I'm looking at here is that the balance can't exceed or can't be over or under the amount generated by 10%. So we just walked through this rather quickly. I only applied manure to one field. And so we are grossly not meeting the requirements here. So, you know, generally, again, our small pit should be within 10% of the I think that's 1,300,000 gallons. And same thing for our stack too, should be within 10% of our wet tons. So if my balance was at a deficit of 30 or over by 30, that would be okay. That would still be within the requirements. Again, the manure sources wouldn't change too much, but we definitely want to look to make sure we're using a manure source that, or manure test result that's within a year. Our field inventory probably hasn't changed too much. If they've already looked at the rotations and crops and feel good about that, we'll just keep rolling through this. I do sometimes try to make sure, like using the field inventory report, that these numbers, the total acre numbers, match the numbers up here in the farm information narrative. Again, this is our play around account, so they don't match, and that's okay. But for your fields, you would want them to match for your plans. Environmental concerns risk assessment. I'm not going to go too much into this. The Vermont P index, it might be worth making sure just at a glance that that your surface cover matches the crop type. And that is determined through the crops tab in goCrop. But other than that, I wouldn't expect too much of this to change, except you might want to look at your, again, April vegetated and making sure that that, again, matches your plan. So, now my alfalfa and other forages will be April vegetated. If I see corn and row crops down here, I'm on what's going on, think, oh, well, did I just rotate to a different crop? And this is a holdover because I forgot to change this in my field info, the holdover from the sod crop I had before. It may or may not be. This might also be a field where there's planning on being an ample cover crop in the winter, so you might not need to change that. This is always worth looking at too, again, because it's based off of your land base and the amount of nutrients you have and the estimated amount of manure that you plan that might be generated on the farm, and just trying to say, do you have enough land base to accommodate the amount of nutrients generated? On our dummy account here, it says no, we do not have enough, and that's because we have 3 fields and 1.3 million gallons of manure. But there are some times where we have worked with producers and this is what they see, even though they have a bunch of fields of just a lot more manure they're generating. And then that becomes a conversation of, can you export any of the manure that you have? Are there any fields nearby that you might be able to spread on? You know, sometimes producers might have more fields than are in their nutrient management plan, and then we can say, okay, you know, what other fields do you manage that we just need to add into your nutrient management plan, and then actually start putting them more on there as well. So just some things to look at, conversations to have. Again, not a bad idea to look at the soil test schedule, see what's coming up down the pike. in terms of how many fields you might need to go out in the fall, and just like have that both on your mind as someone who helps them with their nutrient management plan, and also on their mind of what needs to be updated later. Then in summary, a bunch of information we've seen in different places. And then I think everybody's pretty familiar with the field plan recommendation to be a place again to check out and make sure that your balance is within the standards. And then the other thing that's really important to look at here is that your crop matches the Russell 2 current year. So it's not uncommon sometimes to change a crop and forget to change what placement it is in the rotation, or to update the rotation, and these are out of sync. The other thing that's really important to do, and I'm going to go back into goCrop, is that in the event that you are, let's say, going from hay to corn, in your nutrient planning for past years, the other thing you'll need to take into consideration is the plow down credit. And to do that, you go into nutrient planning, you go into the orange box here to edit this, and you see that we have a couple of options. We can use manure application data from 2023. I'm skipping to the bottom here, which is basically saying, yeah, we're going to use your records that you input as our nitrogen mineralization rate or nitrogen credits for 2024 and subsequent years. But for crops, if we're doing transitioning from sod to an annual crop, we need to take a plow down credit. And then you can see we have these options. Also, if you're going out of soybean into something else, non-leguminous crop, then we'd also want some nitrogen credit for that as well. Or even if it's a leguminous crop, you'd still want to take that nitrogen credit. So we have these options of alfalfa, different ranges of the amount of legume, and then if it's just pure grass. And in general, this kind of goes from low nitrogen credit to a higher nitrogen credit. So if we just had just a pure grass stand at the end of this rotation, then we would choose high yield. We'll update the historical nutrient credit. And you can see now when we open up our little our past years row with our little black button, that we have our nitrogen credit that both captures our 4,000 gallons of manure from 2023 and also our plow down credit from our grass crop as well. And when we open that up, I just pressed the blue button here and it opened it up in another window. Oops. We see here that it's 70 pounds of nitrogen from our grass crop and only and then 13 pounds from our 4,000 gallon application. And 6.24 of that transferred over from our 2023 4,000 gallon application. So that's kind of how some of that works, but that's something else to keep in mind as your rotations are progressing through the years. Right, so now the last thing I'll try to wrap up with in our 15 minutes is the mobile app. I think this is really important as a way, again, for farmers to be able to keep records in the field. So let's see. So here's my mobile phone. And to open up goCrop, you can download the app either on an Android or on any iPhone device. Once you download it, you can open it up. And it'll prompt you to sign in. I've clicked like, this is my phone, that I just wanted to sign in automatically to this farm. the first time you sign into a mobile account, it might take a little while for it to load. So. And the first view that you'll see are the fields. To see if any of the information on the fields, you'll click the one you want to look at. And it defaults to records. And you can see there's a couple of different ways to filter them. You can filter them by the type of record here. You can filter them by this crop year. Today, in the future, any of them that are in the past. So there are some options there. But generally what will happen is once you're on this screen, folks will probably want to add records that are out in the field. So to do that, you press this little plus button up in the upper right-hand corner. And you can choose the record type. For this, we'll start with a manure application. And it really mirrors what you see on the browser on a desktop in goCrop, right? It defaults to the field you were just in. It chooses today's date. We're just going to stick with that today. And then you can choose a corresponding planned application. And so this is basically saying, hey, I had this plan. Is this the application that goes along with the plan? And this will help later when looking at the plan in goCrop. It'll say, okay, these two things are connected, and we'll show that in the nutrient plan. And then it'll say, okay, well, because this is a corresponding application, it already knows that you're taking it from the small pit. And then you can choose, you know, if you want to record your record and loads, rate or total, just like in the browser. And so for this, we'll just go rate and say, you know, 4,000 and not incorporate, and we'll save it. So then we, and then the other thing I wanted to show here also in records is a way to create a counter. And so it's a similar thing with a manure application. You say, okay, I'm going to field behind the barn. We're going to choose the record date. I'm going to go in the past a little bit just to show what that might look like. There's no corresponding application for this one, let's say, and then because there's no corresponding application, I'm able to choose my source, and I'm going to say my record as will be in loads because I want a counter. If I choose rate or total, I'll lose the ability to create a counter. And I'll show you what that counter looks like in a moment. We have to choose our spreader. And since we haven't gone out yet, I'm going to keep my loads at 0. I'm going to say we're not going to incorporate this, and we'll save it. And now you can see that I have this manure application on 13th that has this little counter thing right by it right here. And now when I open this up.
Hey, Lindsay.
Yes.
I'm not sure what we see on screen is what you're talking about.
Oh, interesting.
I see
Okay.
goCrop historical nutrient credit page.
No. Thank you for saying something, Susan.
You're welcome.
Go back here. Wrong Android cast. There we go. Okay, how about this?
I believe so.
Okay.
It looks good.
Thank you, Susan. Sorry about that. I appreciate that. So we're going to quickly go back real quick. When you first go into the app, this is the screen you'll see. You're going to choose the field you want to work with. This was the screen I was talking about where you can see the records. You can filter them with these little buttons up here, either by type of record or the time of the year. But most often you're going to want to add a record, and to do that, you do that with this little plus button up here. From here, you can change any one of the applications. Most often someone might be wanting a manure application. You can change the field you're in, just like the record on the desktop in the browser. You can change the date, make it with a corresponding application, and then you can put in any of that other information, where it's from, how you want to record it, what spreader, and the like. One what I want to talk about too is you can create a counter, and to create a counter, you do that by not putting in any of the you don't, what you're saying, oh, you basically are saving a blank record, right? So I went in here and I created my record, but I put 0 loads. Then to access the counter, we'll click the little counter button. And now, whenever the farmer or the custom applicator or whomever, every time they go to the pit or every time they go onto the field, they can say, oh, that was a load. And then again, they go, okay, this is another load. And you can see that based off of the spreader, oops, sorry, we'll just get out of that. Based off of the spreader here, sorry, pressing the wrong button here. For every load that we apply, it'll say how many gallons per acre are being applied. And we also know that our target overall is 1,300 gallons. Sorry, not our target, but we know that based off of how our spreader size and how many times we've gone to the field, how many total gallons we've applied. So we have the rate per acre and also the total amount of gallons. And as we keep on adding them, that number changes. So this can be a really handy way to enter a record. And you can also use the app to enter records just like you do on the browser. The other really important thing I want to show you also is that when you click the little hamburger in the upper left-hand corner, what you'll see in the very bottom is it says up to date, last sync was a few seconds ago. So let's say a farmer is out in the field, away from Wi-Fi, away from cell service, and they're entering their records and they're doing a really great job. And everybody's so happy because this is one less thing you'll have to do in the fall, and you know it's right. You feel good about that. And then you get home and they forget about it. Well, what can happen is that the records save on the cell phone storage memory, but you need to open up the app and make sure that the last sync was recently. Because what we don't want to happen is that if someone forgets about it and then something happens to their phone and it didn't sync, if it doesn't sync, that means that that information doesn't get stored into the cloud. So it's really important to, like, you know, go out into your field, enter your records into goCrop like you would in a record book. And then one more step is to go home and, you know, open your records and make sure that they're there. Like open up your record book, open up your goCrop account. So there's a couple of other neat features in the mobile. Again, the reason why it was really designed was to help keep records, but you can also view a couple of things on it that can be really handy. So you can see up here, so we're here with defaulted the records tab, field records here, and then we have another tab in the records tab, the nutrient balance. I put that. And this shows us the nutrient balance based off of the records. And you can see that it's a little unhappy with me because I made a manure application in January and we don't have data to back up what that nitrogen credit might be because the Vermont response this spread in January, so we don't have that data. Anyway, so that's why all of these little orange triangles are here. I wouldn't expect you to necessarily see those in a farmer producer field that you're working with. We also have these other tabs below the plan. And the plan again has, just like in the records, it's got 2 sub tabs, plan details, which is saying, hey, here's what we plan to do in 2024. And then we can also see the nutrient balance. And this is the nutrient balance based off the plan. So we're in the plan tab, nutrient balance based off the plan, versus the record tab has a nutrient balance, which is based off the record. And then finally, the last thing that we can look at is in the field info. And again, I'm saying look at, and I really mean look at, because unlike the browser application in Chrome or Firefox or whatever, where you have the ability to edit that, On the app, you don't have the ability to edit the field information or the plan. You really only have the ability to edit and enter records. But this field information has the same stuff that you have in your goCrop account that you saw in your field tab information. So we have these warnings, I think, are there because there's an update. And so it's downloading the updates. Apparently there's a few warnings. I'm wondering if that's because it couldn't create that nitrogen management credit based off of having that winter application. So that is it in a nutshell for what I was hoping to talk about today. Does anybody have any questions?
So I might have missed it, but are you gonna cover, is there a grazing version of goCrop?
Yes. The short, very short answer to that is that there's a way in goCrop to enter grazing credits, but then there's also the grazing component of goCrop, which really looks at the land base, the amount that the land can produce, the number of animals you have, when the resting periods might be at those fields, and then trying to balance rations. But that's like a whole separate tutorial on grazing. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please feel free to reach out and we can schedule a time to do that.
Yes, that would be great.
And just to get at that piece here for nutrient planning, if you want to capture grazing credits, you can do that in the manure tab, or you're in planning, you're in the manure section, and you can say, okay, I'm going to add an estimated grazing credit. And you have a drop down, number of animals, average weight, the days in the field. This gets a little complicated because you might have a field broken into paddocks. And so figuring out the days that they're actually in the field, like full days, like maybe, you know, they're in a paddock for 6 hours and then they move to a different paddock in a different field. And then they're also in the milking parlor. So this takes a little bit of nuance. I think the other thing I would also mention with this is that right now, the state and the 590 standards don't explicitly state to capture grazing animals. And I think part of the reason for that is that when you are choosing a crop for a field that's going to be grazed, you're choosing pasture. So you're choosing pasture, that automatically prompts the recommendations to be a little bit different because they're trying to account already from the manure that will be deposited by the animals. And so I would, in the short term, would say that this is an added step that might not necessarily help the nutrient planning part. So that might be something to again reach out about if this is something you're working on a producer with. Okay, if anybody has any questions, feel free to speak up or otherwise reach out. My contact information's here, my email, my work phone, and my cell phone. So again, even if like you're working on the weekend with a producer or in the evening and you have a question, feel free to call me on my cell phone. I won't be at work and I probably won't be looking at email, but I don't want, you know, a question about goCrop to be keeping you from making progress on a nutrient management plan with a producer. So